Our next speaker is Bernard Carlon, Executive Director, Centres for Road Safety and Marine Safety. Bernard's held senior state government roles in policy, regulation, communication and program delivery across the health, justice, environment and transport portfolios. He is charged with leading the roads, safety and maritime safety strategies, Trauma on Our Roads and Waterways to Zero. And again, we'll have an opportunity to ask him some questions after the presentation, so send the questions through as soon as they occur to you, and a big welcome to Bernard. Thanks so much for being here in person.
Okay, I'd just like to start off, as you've heard, Bernard Carlon. I'm from the Centres for Road Safety and Maritime Safety, and really pleased to be here because, you know, working with the industry and working with people who are passionate about reducing the trauma, particularly on our roads and waterways, but also the risk to people being killed and seriously injured is what I'm really passionate about. And just like to kick off with a video.
In 2019, 352 people died on our roads. What would be a more acceptable number?
Acceptable? 70 maybe?
Actually, this is what 70 people looks like.
It's my family.
So now what do you think would be a more acceptable number?
0. 0.
So the Centre for Road Safety is about producing practical solutions for reducing the trauma on our roads across New South Wales. It's a complex system, the network of around 200,000 kilometres of roads, and we're guided by the Road Safety Plan 2021, which is a multi-government, multi-industry, community-based plan to actually drive down the level of trauma. About 10 years ago, we set a target for the end of 2021 to reduce the fatalities on our road network by 30%. I'm pleased to say as of today, we're at about 28% and around 2 fatalities lower than the trend line in order to get us to that target at the end of this year. So there's been a significant reduction in the amount of trauma over the last 10 years through a range of approaches that actually I'll be canvassing as part of this conversation, but also looking specifically at the relationship of heavy vehicles in the system as well. So that Road Safety Plan essentially has 6 priority areas about trying to transition us to zero. We have a state strategy for transport which has a visionary target for zero fatalities and serious injuries on all of our transport network by 2056. And we're doing a significant amount of work as well in modelling how do we get to that zero target in 2056 and working back from there to put in place the right sort of policy settings, environment, vehicle safety standards in order for us to achieve that ultimate vision of zero trauma on our roads. From a heavy vehicle perspective, there are a number of commitments in the plan, investigating new and proven vehicle technologies, and also working specifically with the industry around the uptake of safety features in vehicles and safer practices. And it's great. I think a really great example of that is the work that was done by our Sydney Metro in working with the industry in designing a whole range of standards for the way in which the work is done in order to eliminate the risk to the most extent that they could in the contract arrangements with heavy vehicles working on that project. We've adopted a safe systems approach, which is internationally recognised as the approach which actually delivers outcomes in the long term and also in the short term. Has key principles around there being a target for no death or serious injury, that people make mistakes and people also will break the law, and that the system needs to be designed in order to avoid those crashes occurring, but also to mitigate the impact of those crashes when they do occur. And so many of you would have seen the significant increase in New South Wales in rolling out audio tactile line marking and barrier systems across the network, wide centre lines and median separation. All of these are proven measures for reducing the impact and also the frequency of crashes on the road network. And unlike our previous speaker, of course, we do have a large volume of trauma. The cost of a community in New South Wales is now $9 billion per annum. And last year we had 297 deaths on our roads and around 10,000 people admitted to hospital with serious injuries. And so, we are focused on reducing that trauma at the same time as looking into the future to design out the risks associated with the network, the vehicles and the behaviour of people within that system. And I've got to say, more and more we start to see this safe systems approach having more integrated relationship across the pillars. So across the safer roads, the vehicle interactions now with ITS and other systems that actually interact with the road network, smart motorways, for example. In terms of safe people, the sorts of technologies in vehicles that are now supporting those drive assist technologies like automatic emergency braking and lane departure. So we see within the safe system over time a strong integration of those, the relationship between the people, the roads and the vehicles as well. One of the other principles clearly is also that notion of shared responsibility. And when we say that, it's not just about the driver, it's also about the institutions, the organisations that purchase vehicles, the organisations that state and federal and local government who manage, administer and build the road network. That shared responsibility is actually a whole of society, a whole of institution shared responsibility that we need to have in order to reduce trauma on our roads. And the last principle is that people are vulnerable. And there's only so much force that an individual can withstand before they're killed or seriously injured in a crash. That in terms of human tolerance, so this slide actually just demonstrates, if you want to save 90% of people in the safest vehicles that we have available on our road network right now, designed in a safe environment, 90% of people will survive a crash at 30 kilometres an hour as a pedestrian, and 90% of the side impact of a tree at 30 kilometres an hour, and 50 kilometres an hour for a side impact with a vehicle, and at 70 kilometres an hour and head-on, if you have the safest vehicle systems in place. And so from our point of view, one of the key issues here is that we need to look at the whole system, continue to reduce the energy in a crash, energy in the system right across the road network in order to moderate the impact on the human body when those crashes inevitably occur. In terms of crash statistics and fatalities in New South Wales, you can see there that I mentioned 297 last year. Heavy vehicles been pretty stable. However, we have over the last 5 years 52 fatalities with pedestrians in relation to heavy vehicle involvement in crashes. In total for heavy vehicles, the last 5 years, 330 people in New South Wales have been killed in crashes involving heavy vehicles, and more than 6,970 people have been injured in those crashes. What we tend to do in the Centre for Road Safety is to actually identify the system causes rather than look for fault. And so we're examining all of the factors and all of the attributes of the movement of people within the system and the forces associated with heavy vehicle movements in order to look to the future as to what we can do to reduce those fatalities and serious injuries. And so you can see serious injuries within the last 5 years as well have significantly decreased, where we've been pretty stable in terms of the heavy vehicle involvement where serious injuries have eventuated. When we go to crashes within the Sydney region, you can see a significant reduction in heavy vehicle serious injury crashes over the last 5 years, and a pretty stable in terms of the involvement of fatalities with heavy vehicle crashes. So when we have a look at those fatal and serious injury crashes in the Sydney region in particular, 93% of them multi-vehicle crashes, 63% at non-intersection locations, 24% on local roads, 51% at 60 kilometres or below, so they're not all happening in high-speed environments, and 14% speeding was a factor in those crashes. And in terms of fatal crashes involving pedestrians, 24% of them were pedestrians, 24 motorcycles and 5% cyclists. And so within the urban environment, we can see that there's a significant vulnerable road user interaction with heavy vehicle movements across the system as well. And when we look at the serious injuries, although it's low percentage of the total involvement, there are actually significant numbers when we talk about the urban environment. And so when we then look to those specific crash by crash movement, so the types of crashes, and you can see there pedestrians further along, quite a detailed slide, but the point that I'd make here is when we've looked at a study around 80 pedestrian fatalities over the last 20 years, where a pedestrian had suffered fatal injuries following a collision with a truck or other heavy vehicle, like bus, 42 appear to be where the truck driver did not see the pedestrian prior to the collision. Another 18 where the truck collided with an unobserved pedestrian after moving off from a stationary position. Further highlighting the importance of technologies and mitigating those blind spots, creating an environment where the community understands those risks as well. And we've been running a Be Truck Aware campaign in New South Wales for the last 4 years, really highlighting those risks for pedestrians, motorcycle riders and bicycle riders within the urban environment. But it really does highlight that this is an area where we need to continue to do work in terms of the technology within the system as well. I'd just like to also mention asset that we have. So since 1996, we have all of the data associated with every crash involving a heavy vehicle in New South Wales since 1996, including the vehicle types, including the other road users involved in those crashes, the age of vehicle drivers, the type of vehicles, where they were registered, all of that detailed information in a very easy to use data system on our website to focus on what is it that we need to examine in order to design a system for the future that leads us towards zero. And so, thinking as well about some of those mitigation measures in terms of safer vehicles. We can see coming into the market, both in light vehicles but also heavy vehicles, that technology which would assist in reducing the likelihood and severity of crashes. Underarm protection can prevent other road users from being dragged under the heavy vehicle. The markings and increase awareness and the visibility of heavy vehicles on the network. Blind spot monitoring and drive assist technologies, including automatic emergency braking systems, critical to continuing to improve the management of risks as heavy vehicles are moving around the network. And so we can see here so we can see here the mitigation measures for safer vehicles. I've got to say, as I move around the state and see a lot of heavy vehicles on the network, it's really heartening to see those leaders in the industry actually adopting these standards and putting them in place. And we increasingly start to see the mitigation of the trauma from crashes associated with vehicles with these sorts of safety features embedded in them. And, for example, the reduction in side and rear impacts into marked trailers ranges between 29 to 41% in dark conditions, a reduction in fatality and injury crashes of around 44% in dark conditions. So these have real benefits in managing that risk, but also reducing the impact of trauma on our roads. As I mentioned, we've been running as well a fairly comprehensive safety campaign over the last 4 years in terms of the rest of the road user people who are out there mixing with heavy vehicles. We've gone through a significant increase in terms of our infrastructure build over the last 5 years, especially a lot more heavy vehicle movements in the network, and we really are keen to make sure that we're educating everybody in the system to actually look out, be aware for trucks, but also to have responsible organisations actually put in place the mitigation and technology systems that actually support their drivers in behaving in a way that actually reduces the risk for other road users as well. In terms of safer roads, we have been building a significant increase in the road network over the last decade, but that's accelerating. We're investing significantly in managing things like the left-hand turn issues, the green on green protection with traffic signals, and a whole range of other controls and interactions, particularly with vulnerable road users, to try and mitigate those risks. You can see we're building separated cycleways to try and get those interactions reduced as well right across the network. And when we're looking at mitigation measures and future initiatives, we've actually become a member of the Construction and Logistics Community Safety Australia program to improve management of work-related road safety in construction. There's some tremendous work happening right across the industry that we want to continue to make sure that we're engaged, we're providing support, information, and getting that connection back to all road users, all organisations, in order to continue the effort to reduce trauma on our roads and the impact that it has on our families and communities and within organisations and businesses. Thanks, Helen.
Terrific presentation, and really very interesting in sort of thinking of the system-wide responsibility. We've heard a lot about, individual companies that have heavy vehicles and so forth, but this shared responsibility. It's a really interesting concept to think about. I mean, when there's an accident on the road, a driver will be taken away for mandatory drug and alcohol testing. Obviously a pedestrian or a cyclist perhaps is not going to be taken away for that testing. So in what sense, to what extent is it really shared? Because that does seem like the onus is still on the driver.
Yes, so look, we, again, when we're developing systems, we're looking at all of those individuals who are involved in that context. When police are doing an investigation, anybody who's admitted to hospital, their blood samples are taken. When they do the investigation, they will charge a pedestrian that's walked against the red light. That's so within those investigations, from a police perspective, they actually do charge people who've broken the rules. In our data, it shows that around 60% of the total fatality crashes, the road movement that was initiated, which might have been a breaking of a law or a movement, doesn't say that everybody might not be implicated as well. Somebody might be intoxicated and somebody else walk out on the road against a red.
Right.
But that initial movement, the key vehicle movement that we assess, about 60% of the occasion, it's not the heavy vehicle. And in the serious injuries, that tends to go up slightly. So in most of the instances, the key vehicle, and that's why we're trying to educate the community as well around the environment they're working in, the blind spots that heavy vehicles have, the responsibilities for organisations like government separating cyclists on key freight routes. So I think those sorts of solutions are critical. But certainly when police investigate and charge somebody, they will charge them based on who broke the rules. Okay.
And so, you think about the UK has got all that nudge technology going on. They put footsteps on the ground leading up to a bin so that when people walk along, they might put the rubbish into the bin. I noticed that Transport New South Wales puts down warnings on footpaths, look out before you step out. But if you're looking at your mobile phone, you're not reading any of that. So how do you get that message understood?
Yeah, look, I think actually there are signs on the sides of heavy vehicles saying look out as well before you step out. So we're working with the industry as well to try and get those sorts of messages in situ to try and manage that. Again, we have police operations who actually do pedestrian operations in those freight routes which are around the metropolitan area where there's high density pedestrian movements. And they actually fine people for walking against the red. So there are we need to, again, have a system-wide approach. The advertising supports it, education, the way in which organisations like businesses or heavy vehicle operators that are working on projects train their drivers to be aware of that risk of pedestrians in that environment. slow them to 40 k's, 30 k's on those routes. All of those things make a big difference to the reduction of risk.
I feel like a lot of work's been done with the buses, right? That there's suddenly a better community understanding of the fact that that driver's not going to be able to stop on a dime. That driver has a route to complete, and you will give way to that bus, and that's gradually been understood because it's just happening. So that's how they're behaving. They're bigger than you, and that's how it works. How would you take that and move it to, the examples that you see of what people do to professional drivers on the road, make your hair stand on end. He's got how many tonnes, and you've just pulled in front of him and come to a dead stop.
Yeah, absolutely.
That seems to be behind, for example, the give way to buses understanding.
Yeah, look, I would say that's probably the case, although, clearly with buses, we still had 9 fatalities over the last 5 years with bus-related crashes and significant number of injuries. But I'd say that you're quite right to point out that we need to continue to be, getting in there with the community and actually doing the education, the enforcement, but also changing the environment that we operate in as well, so that we reduce the conflicts as well between heavy vehicle movements. They do essential tasks in keeping our whole economy and life working. It's Road Rules Awareness Week this week.
Is it?
So, yes,
put the bloody phone down.
You'll see, put the bloody phone down. And you'll see lots of communication. I mean, even on our Facebook site, we have a reach of more than 1.2 million people a week. Okay. The rules and people's engagement in this area is really strong. The community is really interested. And I think we all need to continue to work together to make that happen.
Let's see if we can get to these 2 questions on the Google Sheet. Is there any evidence of issues created when persons move between vehicles with and without intelligent safety features, with drivers becoming maybe too reliant on that technology, or that the technology, which isn't perfect, might cause complacency? Just a brief answer on that.
Yeah, there's been a few studies internationally around this, and there's some that's happening now. What I'd say is that without the driver assist technologies, the risks are much greater than the proportion of people who actually disengage from them. And the most important factor is when designing those, that we need to do them so they don't rely on the driver. Those automated emergency braking systems take half the time, which means half the stopping distance to react.
Relative to us. They're better than humans.
That's right. Yeah. And so we're going to be better off with those systems. We do need to continue to educate people about the value and we hear rumours about people switching them off and that sort of thing. And we need to ensure that we can give assurance that those technologies are going to work.
Are there plans to educate from the schools to the general public, future road users, bicycles and pedestrians? Do we ask schools to do a lot, don't we? But, there's 120 hours of driving kids have to do. Does it come into that education process?
Absolutely, and this week also just released a new digitised road user handbook for getting your driver's licence as well. We're the only state in Australia that has a mandatory part of a curriculum, a road safety element within the curriculum from kindergarten through to year 12. Okay. We have a Safety Town website which is available for in-classroom, sort of on the smart whiteboards, interactive activities for kids.
So the resources
are there. We highlight high-risk issues like buses and heavy vehicles and stopping distances in the curriculum around physics and maths and that sort of area. So there is a lot going on that I think generally most people wouldn't be aware of. But yeah, there's integrated through the whole of the education system.
I love that you've got it in the physics curriculum. That's fantastic.
Yeah, but look, I think the reality is people who have control over the system now are us, the adults in the room, the owners and operators of businesses. And so really to tackle the problem today, not the problem for our young next generation, we all need to actually focus on the problem today.
A great point on which to end. Thank you so much, Bernard.
Excellent.
Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Al.
Bernard Carlon there.